assessment, they found that our evidence collection personnel could go on site to conduct their work. They found low levels of aircraft fuel. After they finished their assessment, we began mapping and gridding the crime scene. The gridding process is important to help facilitate an orderly and methodical approach to evidence collection. Basically, as we get further away from the crater, the grids will probably increase in size. The crater area, the grids will be very, very small. We are looking to recover human remains, the black box, or the voice data recorder, personal effects, and aircraft parts. Before the evidence collection team, which numbers approximately 80 personnel from various agencies, before they enter the scene, again, they'll be given a safety briefing inasmuch as there's still materials out there that could prove potentially hazardous. As you can expect, the search will be painstaking, will probably last, and again, this is an estimate, 3 to 5 weeks. I can't overstate how methodical and painstaking this process will be. The NTSB will be conducting a flyover sometime this afternoon in order to better assess the scope of the scene. Certainly, in light of their experience, they are able to compare the scene here to scenes of past to give us a better indication of what we might have here. One important point I want to make is that if anyone out there has information to provide, they can do so via the internet, and the website address is ifccfbi.gov. Should there be any interest in finding out about the attacks, individuals should feel free to contact 866-483-5137. If there is any information to provide to the FBI with respect to what had occurred, feel free to contact the FBI Pittsburgh office, 412-471-2000. I'd like to defer now to the Lieutenant Colonel and the Major. They'll discuss the efforts of the Pennsylvania State Police.
Robert Hickes, Hickes. And
we were listening to an update there from Pennsylvania, the latest on the information on United Airlines Flight 93 that crashed yesterday just southeast of Pittsburgh. We'll have more on that update in just a minute. First to Leon.
Yeah, we're going to get back to our Bob Franken, who's working the crash site where that plane hit at the Pentagon in Washington. Let's go there now. Bob?
Well, Leon, I'm outside, of course, overlooking the place where the plane collided, but CNN producer Chris Plant is inside. He reports that the Pentagon is being evacuated. Of course, they wanted to open it for business this morning, the parts that were considered safe. But Chris Plant says it's being evacuated because of the danger of a spreading fire. We reported a while ago that the fire had spread from over there to other parts of the building and, in fact, had reached the inner ring. So for the second day in a row, the Pentagon is being evacuated. To give you some idea of just how tense it is here, something happened about 10 minutes ago. About 10 minutes ago, a police loudspeaker went off in this area. Get out of the area, said this person on the loudspeaker. Incoming plane, get out of the area. Well, all of us, of course, the camera crews, all of them pointed their cameras skyward, everybody looking to see evidence of this. About 2 minutes later, the police voice came on again and said, never mind, it was a friendly. So they are being so very, very careful and sometimes tense, and sometimes, as a matter of fact, they overreact, but of course they're concern would be much greater if they underreacted. And we've also seen evidence just in the last few minutes of how intensely the FBI plans to live up to its promise to investigate. We saw just a couple of minutes ago FBI agents fan out in the little grassy area right in back of me, fan out looking for whatever tiny pieces of evidence they could find in the grass, trying to in fact live up to the promise that they've made that they're going to investigate this very thoroughly, and of course to make sure they did it in an area that cameras could see so the message could be delivered to the rest of the world. Leon?
Well, Bob, let me get back to you. You're saying that the Pentagon's being evacuated right now because it's concerned about spreading fire and causing more damage. What is the latest right now on the extent of the damage inside the building? And do you know how many people were actually back at work in the building today?
Well, no, but we had been told that it would at most only be about half of the workforce. What we have been hearing is that the fire has been spreading through the roofs. It has made it to the inner ring, and according to Chris Plant, that fact has caused them to decide that they want to, in fact, get people out of the building now because it is becoming unsafe.
All right. Bob, can we give us an idea right now of which side of the building you're on and which side is perhaps is the biggest, I guess, looking at the biggest threat right now from this fire? Any idea on that?
Well, right now the biggest threat continues to be the side where the airplane collided. You can see, of course, right over there where it crashed into the building yesterday morning. It crashed into the building, and there is a concern that there's going to be a collapse, particularly of that area. And as a result, the people who have been searching for some of the casualties have been very, very careful about going on. There's an ongoing debate about whether they need to just collapse that part of the building or whether they want to try and shore it up and make it safe. However, the other side of the building is where many of the top officials of the Pentagon are located, and the fire has continued to spread, sometimes through the roof, but it has gotten to the inner ring, and it has become a bit of a threat. The secretaries of the Army and the Navy, as a matter of fact, were moved from their offices on that side of the building and went down to the basement. The evacuation is just a precautionary measure, but the fire is not under control.
All right, understood. We'll let you get back to covering that. Bob Franken by the Pentagon in Washington. We'll check back with you later on. In the meantime, let's go over to Derek.
Yeah, we wanted to get to Bob very quickly to get that information on the air, and so I didn't give you a complete recap on what we learned from the FBI in that briefing from Pennsylvania. It was Wallace Miller of the FBI giving us the latest on the investigation into the crash of United Airlines Flight 93. That's the flight that yesterday crashed around 10 a.m. Eastern. It was going from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, California. 38 passengers, 2 pilots, and 5 flight attendants on board that flight. All of them lost their lives. Wallace Miller of the FBI telling us that it now is safe for evidence collection experts to go into that crash site and start picking up pieces of evidence that will include human remains, looking for the black box for more clues as to what happened on board that flight, also aircraft parts and personal items that hopefully at one point would be returned to family members. This, as Mr. Miller pointed out, is going to be a painstaking process, very slow and deliberate. It could take as long as 3 to 5 weeks for all of the evidence collection to take place. He also let us know that later this afternoon, the NTSB will be doing a flyover of the area to get a better idea of the total size of that crash site. Once again, that's the latest on the crash of United Airlines Flight 93 that crashed just about 26 hours ago. Paula, up to you in New York.
Darren, I don't know whether you mentioned this. You might very well have, but I was busy talking with the producer during the tail end of your reporting. Apparently, government sources are now telling CNN that senior administration officials actually informed members of Congress and said that they believe that plane you were just talking about was initially directed at another government target, possibly the White House, the Capitol, or Camp David. Perhaps if those black boxes you were talking about are ever retrieved, we will have a better understanding of why that plane went down in a rural area outside of Pittsburgh. The paramedics in New York City, who have been working around the clock now, have just held a news conference in New York, and we want to share a part of that with you right now to give you an idea of just exactly what they're up against and trying to get to those folks they think might even be alive under all of this rubble. Let's listen.
As was mentioned before, it's not so much an asbestos effect. The problem really has been the dust, the concrete and paper. When you look at the site, there's literally feet of dust. So that from that standpoint, there's been a lot of respiratory maladies. There's no toxic chemicals as best we can tell, and that's an advantage. But there have been a lot of respiratory problems such as wheezing and asthma-like symptoms.
All right, there you have a paramedic describing some of the conditions that paramedics are up against. He was just describing wheezing. I imagine we caught that mid-sentence that he was talking about the tremendous amount of smoke that is still billowing from what is left of the North Tower, South Tower of the World Trade Center, both of which collapsed within an hour and a half of the initial blasts of the hijacked planes crashing into them. The third tower going, actually which is called building number 7, much later in the day. Let's come back to what city officials are confronting in terms of the injured and the potential dead. Hillary Lane has just finished listening to a news conference that St. Vincent's Hospital held. This was one of the hospitals closest to the World Trade Center area. What can you tell us, Hillary?
Well, Paula, I can update you again on the numbers, and that is going to tell you a lot. They are not very different from the last time we reported them. 369 patients passing through. That's just about 5 more from the last time we reported. 4 deaths reported here, 1 at an affiliated hospital. That says a lot. According to one doctor here, and I'm going to quote him, by not seeing a lot of patients, they fear that there are not a lot of survivors. So the process down at the site moving very slowly, meticulously, gently. We had been reporting earlier they had pulled some people out of the wreckage. The hospital here had gotten a phone call at 7:45 a.m. telling them to expect some of those people, but they have not received any more phone calls alerting them of any more survivors who may have been pulled out of the wreckage this morning. They have brought in quite a number of firefighters and rescue workers who were involved in the rescue effort, and some of their injuries are incredibly telling. They have abrasions on their fingers from literally digging with their fingers, trying to move rubble, trying to help people who may still be alive. And that really says a lot for the rescue effort that's going on. But what also says a lot is behind me, empty stretchers, empty wheelchairs, and dozens of hospital personnel here on standby and waiting to do what they're needed to do if they should be called into action. Paula?
Hillary, you just mentioned the folks on standby, and I think that Mayor Giuliani wanted the message heard loud and clear that New Yorkers will not be paralyzed by what has happened to this city. He said there have been thousands and thousands of people who volunteered to help the paramedics, who volunteered to do whatever they can in the cleanup process. We know people in record numbers are offering to donate blood. And I understand, Hillary, at a bunch of hospitals around the city, you have doctors traveling from out of town to volunteer their services at emergency rooms. Have you seen that there at St. Vincent's? I think you mentioned a part of that about a minute ago.
Absolutely. I spent the day at Bellevue Hospital yesterday, and from early in the morning, there were people coming in off the street. There were 2 nurses from Texas here in New York City on vacation, heard about this, rushed in as quickly as they could to offer their services. Dozens of volunteers, and I tell you, the line to donate blood stretched out the door. They were moving people in groups of 50 to get them processed, to get the blood in and to be ready. So an incredible, incredible volunteer effort, professionals and civilians as well.
At Morris. All right, Hillary, thanks so much for that update. If I'm understanding this clearly, someone's just giving me some messages from the New York Medical Examiner saying they are perfectly, the system at least, this sounds very hard and cold, but this is a fact of dealing with this tragedy, that they can handle more bodies. There were some reports, and in fact, we reported some of the Associated Press reports this morning that barges had actually taken some of the dead from New York into New Jersey. That is not the case. However, it is true that some New York City cab companies have removed seats from their vans to help in the transport of victims across the river to New Jersey, where some of the city hospitals there can accommodate some of the wounded. And I think it'll be clearer in the days to come exactly what transpired last night. I think one of the biggest frustrations of all of the workers who've been involved in this rescue process is that they weren't able to even get into that perimeter area surrounding the World Trade Center until the wee hours of the morning because of the fear of structures continue to fall on them and the amount of smoke billowing out from the area and other safety concerns. So there you have it, Darren, the very latest from New York now. And as you've seen, or actually Leon, a tremendous outpouring of support for these firefighters and police workers who have to do the Lord's work right now.
Yeah, definitely, Paula. We've seen much of the same sort of reaction in the other focal point for this story as well in Washington, D.C. Many people there coming together, rallying to the cause, if you will. Now, the latest that we've gotten there on the scene at the Pentagon is that the Pentagon is telling people and reporting to the press that they don't expect any more survivors to be pulled from the rubble there. You're seeing in our live picture the work that goes on there at that scene. We just checked with our Bob Franken, who was saying that they believe that they have found some places where there may be bodies, and they will be getting them after they get more control over that fire that is still continuing to burn. But the victims that were pulled out of there and that were able to walk away from that location there are at Arlington Hospital, which is where our medical news correspondent Rhea Blinky is right now. Let's check in with her to get the latest from there. Rhea?
Yeah, Leon, more than any other hospital in the United States, the Virginia Hospital Center at Arlington is the one that should be most prepared for a terrorist attack because of its close proximity to the Pentagon. This hospital's metal was tested yesterday when during a 3-hour period, make that a 2-hour period, some 30 patients were brought here with various contusions, burns, broken bones. The staff here was on an orange alert at that time, and there was nowhere near any level of great concern because of this hospital's preparation. Periodically, they do actually go through a number of procedures to make sure that they have all their procedures in line. In fact, some of the administrators who were involved in the emergency services yesterday mentioned that they had seen the plane crashes into the 2 World Trade towers, and that they indicated, you know, what would happen if something like that occurred here just moments before the plane crashed into the Pentagon. They went back through their materials, and within 10 minutes, they got the call that, in fact, we've had an attack. We need to make sure that we have everything up to speed. We want to make sure and show you some pictures of some of the people who arrived yesterday. As I mentioned, during that 2-hour period, 30 patients, but overall, some 44 patients treated here at Virginia Hospital Center. Many of those people have been released, 26 of those people discharged, but some 17 were admitted. Of those 17, 9 of those people went to ICU. 2 of them listed in serious condition, 7 of them in critical condition. Some of the others are now stable at this time, and 1 of the people was transferred because they're military personnel to Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. There are a couple of other hospitals in the area, including the Washington Hospital Center, which is the only major hospital center here that has an adult burn center. They took more of the serious injuries at the Washington Hospital Center. There are some 12 patients there now, 7 of those patients listed as critical with severe burns. At Walter Reed, we mentioned there's 1 transfer from here, but also 2 other patients, military personnel. And it's anticipated that some of the other patients who have come to this facility and others around the area will also go to Walter Reed as they stabilize, if in fact they are military personnel. And 1 other hospital in the region, Inova Alexandria Hospital, took in 14 patients as a result of the attack on the Pentagon. It's been a very challenging time for this hospital, but again, they feel that they've stood up extremely well. In fact, their Code Orange alert, which is their highest status of alert, in which they call in all the staff members and get as much help as they can, is now canceled. They suspect, it's not very likely, they will receive more patients from the rescue and recovery operations. Even though they want to keep hope alive, they certainly don't anticipate that they will see large numbers, the waves of patients that they saw yesterday. Leon?
Rhea, quickly, if you can tell me, are you hearing any word about there being blood shortages there, as we were hearing in other places like up in New York?
We did hear yesterday that Inova Alexandria Hospital was having some problems with blood shortages. We are not hearing that today. In fact, we checked with Washington Hospital Center, and they too seem to be having good blood supplies. However, we don't want to discourage people from donating, but we don't understand that it's necessarily a problem at this point.
All right, well, that's good news. Rhea Blinky reporting live for us this morning from Arlington Hospital. Darren?
The story, of course, affecting not just here in the U.S., but all around the world. And in fact, as we understand it, a quarter of U.S. embassies around the world are still closed today. For more on that, let's go to the State Department and our Andrea Koppel. Andrea.
Darren, this is really the other half of the story. While the search and rescue is going on here in the United States, the diplomats in this building, including the top U.S. diplomat, Secretary of State Colin Powell, sent out orders yesterday for all embassies to review their security procedures. And as you mentioned, the final tally as things stand right now is that more than 50 out of more than 260 U.S. embassies and consulates around the world have now temporarily closed their doors. And we're told that all of the embassies in both the Middle East, on the Arabian Peninsula, and in North Africa have closed. Now, they say that this was done really as a precautionary measure. They have no real specific or credible threats to these embassies, but they'd rather be safe than sorry. Now, while the embassies are closed, there is another effort that's underway. In the words of one State Department official, Darren, it's really a message of, are you with us or are you against us? That's the message Secretary Powell is sending out as he speaks with leaders around the world, trying to rally the international community to the United States side. That's not a difficult effort right now, as we've heard calls coming in from around the world expressing support for the United States. And as we've already reported, right now at the NATO headquarters in Belgium, in Brussels, ambassadors there from all 19 NATO member states are right now reviewing a draft which would give the United States upfront support if and when it makes the decision that it knows who was behind yesterday's attacks, that all of NATO's military capability would be at the ready should the United States need it. So right now what you're seeing is an intense diplomatic effort both within NATO, the United Nations, the European Union, with the Russians, with the Pakistanis. We understand Secretary Powell also spoke with people in that country. Why is that significant? Because they're the neighbors and supporters of the Taliban militia in Afghanistan. Darren, so right now as things stand, we have more than 50 U.S. embassies that are closed and intense diplomatic efforts underway.
Yeah, and on
Darren?
that point, Andrea, I want to get this quick, but I think important question in here. I imagine there are a lot of Americans traveling overseas who are following the story, are perhaps scared. If they're in a country where the U.S. embassy is closed, who are they to contact if they're in trouble and need information?
That's a very good question. If there are emergency needs that any U.S. citizens might have, we're told that they can still contact the embassy. What it means is that the embassy isn't open for business for things like visas and whatnot. But if an American citizen should have need for information or any advice, things of that nature, they can call their U.S. embassy or consulate as they would do under any circumstances.
Very good point in clarifying exactly what closed means in terms of an embassy and business. Andrea Koppel at the State Department, thank you. Paula, back up to you in New York.
All right, Darren, I want to share some new pictures with our audience out there of what Ground Zero looked like yesterday, shortly after the impact of the multiple terrorist attacks here, when two hijacked planes slammed into two separate World Trade Center towers 18 minutes apart. A lot of the people who evacuated the North Tower, which was the first tower hit, describe it taking 45 minutes to get out of the building. So in fact, the second jet had hit the South Tower at the time they were being evacuated. They didn't even know what was going on above them. This looks relatively calm as you look at these pictures, but folks who are being evacuated from these buildings describe something different. Some people in a state of panic, some people screaming, and those diligently following the instructions of the law enforcement agents. The one thing you also need to understand, this picture obviously was taken after both towers had collapsed, which had happened in sort of the 10 o'clock hour of this broadcast. The one striking thing about the city today is that it is, at least to me, as someone who's lived here a long time, eerie. It is unbelievably quiet. There's a good reason for that. Most companies advise their employees not to go to work today. All the public schools are closed, the private schools, the parochial schools. The major stock markets are closed today. As you just heard Darren and Leon say, no flights are expected to resume today, at least not at noon today, as was originally expected. And right now I want to go to a piece that Maria Hinojosa filed to give you an idea of just how strange it is out there, particularly for those of us who are used to a city that's full of vitality. Let's go.
Midtown Manhattan, the heart of New York City. Usually a buzz, today quiet. An awful quiet.
This is what downtown looks like where I come from.
A quiet that stretched all the way from the foot of Manhattan through what should be bustling streets.
Normally you just pass and go about your daily work, but now you stop to say hello, how are you?
A quiet at the Port Authority, where hundreds of commuters should be gathering. Quiet, too, at Penn Station, where a flood of travelers is supposed to emerge. Today, a trickle.
Usually it's elbow to elbow, trying to run and get the train and just get to your job.
And outside on the street, the Madison Square Garden marquee, black.
This is the M104 to United Nations.
It's hard to believe that in the middle of a Wednesday morning, in the middle of 6th Avenue, in the heart of Greenwich Village in Manhattan, that there's no traffic, nothing behind me, nothing coming from in front of me, standing in the middle of 6th Avenue. It's the eeriest of feelings.
People jousting around, running around, bumping into people, not caring about anything, because we're in such a great free society. And now we have to be careful of what we may do. People look at people apprehensively. So it's a different feeling altogether.
Businesses were closed except to help rescue workers. So were bridges and tunnels. Even the pet shop was closed.
Not up there. Not up there.
Usually trucks roll by at 5:30 in the morning in front of our home, and it wakes us up, and you kind of. And today there was nothing. It was so strange. I actually want the noise back.
Instead of work, the sign said that people should give blood or pray. And missing from the sky, that signature view of downtown Manhattan, the Twin Towers used to poke into the sky. Now there's just space. A lot of things missing in New York today. That New York attitude, gone for now. Maria Hinojosa, CNN, New York.
And I must say to Paul, up there in New York, even from our perspective here in Atlanta, for many of those of us who have visited New York so many times, that is eerie to see a city that quiet and that somber. Well, let's talk now about the investigation into finding out exactly who is responsible for this. Officials are saying that early investigation into these deadly attacks point to Islamic extremist and alleged terrorist mastermind Osama bin Laden. Our national correspondent Mike Betcher is joining us here on the set. He's got the latest for us on the investigation, and you've been checking out things. And I want to ask you, first of all, in looking at what you've heard and seen so far and talking to those you have, has anyone said to you that they think that the 4 attacks that happened yesterday were the only 4 that were planned? Because that, to me, would seem sort of strange to think that any group that could be so efficient that they would have 100% effectiveness or efficiency here.
Well, I was told by one source that they wanted to ensure, they're speculating now, but that these groups obviously wanted to ensure that they were successful. In other attempts that have occurred, usually a quarter or a half or sometimes none of the efforts work. But there was a concern, is this over? And no one can answer that question yet.
All right, well, how close now are they getting to actually identifying who they think they're going to be going after here?
Well, in the United States, the search is centering on 3 fronts. First, that car that was seized at Logan International Airport in Boston. Inside the car were flight training manuals. They're looking at that car. We've confirmed independently that indeed there are interesting items inside of that car that FBI agents want to look at. Also, another car was seized at Daytona Airport. In that car, again, there were items in Arabic apparently relating to Osama bin Laden, and that is the reason they are looking at that car. It has been towed away and is being looked at. And at a second location in Florida, in Venice, a couple there has been questioned by the FBI. They run a flight school, and they say that the FBI indicated to them that maybe 2 of their former students a year ago may have had something to do with the attacks yesterday, Leon.
Let me ask you about the material you said that was found in Boston, because our Bill Delaney was on about maybe an hour and a half or so ago, and he was saying that there was some concern that that information may actually be false information floating out there, because they would find it, because the experts he talked to found it so hard to believe that you would find something left behind that would be an Arabic flight training manual. Is something as specific as that being left behind in the wake of this?
Well, let me give you an example. The Daytona car may provide some answers to that. Maybe these people wanted those cars to be found, because we have indications in the Daytona car that information was left very obvious relating to Osama bin Laden, that it was left out there for people to see. So, you know, you can speculate all you want about this, and it's difficult to know. The agents the intelligence analysts themselves are really wrestling with this issue, and to second guess a terrorist is a difficult thing to do.
All right, what about the overseas cooperation that we've been hearing about so much lately? That the U.S. is going to be seeking it from other states, other entities overseas. And we've heard also that many folks in the intelligence community are concerned that there is no human intelligence, at least not like there used to be. The U.S. doesn't have as many people on the ground in different places. Any concern that that fact alone will prevent them from finding out exactly who is responsible?
No, they do not think it will prevent them from finding out who is responsible for this. And what they're looking at is information that they developed over the last 2 years that Al-Qaeda is not a group, it's a network. And I think Secretary Powell said the same thing this morning. It is a network, and this network has been mutating over the past 2 years, and they've been trying to study this mutation. For example, Al-Qaeda has been reaching out to other terrorist groups, especially in North Africa and especially Algerians. And in 1994, for example, the only other case kind of similar to this was a hijacking that went bad for the Algerian terrorist group GIA, which has contacts to bin Laden. And in that case, they wanted to ram that jet into the Eiffel Tower, but that did not work. And so they're looking at that. They're also looking at possible significance of dates. Why did this happen in September? They know that bin Laden recently, and if you look at his most recent videotape that came out a few months ago, in that tape, he really embraces the Palestinian Intifada, which is a real shift for bin Laden. In the past, it has been American presence overseas. So they are looking at possible symbolism of September, going back to Black September, which was the radical Palestinian group that hijacked 4 planes back in 1970. 3 of those were successful hijackings, and also they were responsible for the Munich massacre during the Olympics. So they're looking at all of these things, going through their files, but nothing hard yet.
That's a great indicator of just how much work there is to be done here. Mike Boettcher, thank you very much. We'll be talking with you throughout the day on this one. Darren, over to you.
Leon, thank you. The stories about so many things, of course, fear and shock about what has happened to the United States. On a very practical matter, though, for many travelers, it means they are stuck wherever they were yesterday morning and they can't get home. Originally, the FAA had said early as possible the air restrictions on U.S. airspace would be lifted at noon today. We reported over an hour ago that that was not going to happen at noon. We have yet to hear what time that could be reinstated, but meanwhile, we're getting word that when flights do resume in the U.S., they will look very different than what we are used to as Americans. And with more on that, let's go to the White House, and our Kelly Wallace is standing by with more information on that. Kelly.
Well, Darren, obviously a big concern for many passengers around the country, but certainly a big concern for the administration. Senior administration officials telling my colleague John King just a short time ago that the full expectation is that Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta would have some announcement later today. Now, that the reason that this 12 noon Eastern time deadline has come and gone, we had senior administration officials telling CNN last night that the full expectation was that the airports would open at 12 noon Eastern time. These senior officials saying that the reason that deadline has come and gone and that the airports have not been reopened is that they really haven't had enough time to put sufficient security precautions in place. We heard Secretary Mineta say last night that they are going to impose tougher security guidelines and measures at the nation's airports before they reopen. Now, I did talk to another law enforcement source earlier who said, look, the U.S. government wants to be comfortable. It certainly wants to open up the airports as quickly as possible, get people back to normal, get U.S. business up and running. But the U.S. government also wants to be comfortable that proper security measures are in place. This source saying that there is a whole menu of recommendations on the table, including toughening security on the ground, such as checking in, such as identification, maybe even no curbside checking at some airports, and even some more security measures in the air, such as putting more air marshals on planes. So a lot of discussion right now, though, Darren. The full expectation, though, some announcement coming from Secretary Mineta later today. As you can see, the U.S. government trying to balance sort of competing priorities here, trying to get things back to normal as quickly as possible, but definitely wanting tougher security measures in place. Darren, back to you.
Clearly, people flying across America want it to be safe, Kelly. I think one of the things that's difficult right now, before travelers and their loved ones had that noon deadline to at least look forward to, and now not only did the administration take that off the table, they haven't even put another one on. Any word on when that announcement might come?
No, as I told you, my colleague John King, hearing that Secretary Mineta expected to make some sort of announcement today, some expectation that possibly airports could reopen today, according to one law enforcement source. But again, while you said, Darren, that many people sort of hoping that airports would be up and running, I bet you that a lot of the people around the country certainly want to make sure that tougher security measures in place, steps are being taken. There's a lot of concern, as we've heard reported all throughout the day. I heard it yesterday when I was up in New York. A lot of people are concerned about how could this happen? How could 4 airliners be hijacked? And so certainly I think the American people would like to sort of see tougher measures in place to try to, in some way, make sure this never happens again.
Yeah,
Darren, back to you.
absolutely. No one wants to fly if it's not safe. And you look at the same time, 4 different planes, 2 airlines, and 3 different airports, and it makes people feel very unsettled about how safe it is to fly here in the U.S. Kelly Wallace at the White House. Thank you, Leon.
Well, you know, this is a perfect point to check in on a few airports, and we've got a reporter spread out this morning. Our Kathleen Koch is standing by there at Dulles Airport, and we've got our Ed Lavandera. He's in Dallas. And Bill Delaney is standing by at Logan Airport, which is the point of much scrutiny today. Let's go now and start with Bill. Bill?
Well, much scrutiny. This airport is still closed, Leon, and closed indefinitely. But I want to say right at the beginning of our little report here, a rapidly developing situation. A local television station now reporting that the FBI has ID'd all suspects and is about to make arrests. We can't confirm that. It is being broadcast, however, on a usually reliable local station here in Boston. Now, what we also know, of course, has been reported throughout the morning. A car was taken from Logan Airport Central Parking Garage overnight, brought to an FBI processing facility. As Mike Boettcher mentioned earlier, that car being gone over. Interesting material, Mike Boettcher called it. It's being called more specifically by law enforcement sources here an Arab language training manual for flying a big airplane. That car, as well as seats from Logan Airport being gone over at an FBI processing facility, the seats being gone over, seats from the airport, for possible DNA evidence of who may have been involved with this, as I say, rapidly developing situation out here at the still closed Logan Airport. Back to you, Leon.
Well, Bill, before we let you go, let me ask you some more about this information you're hearing about the FBI being about to make some arrests right now. Does this mean the FBI is pretty much wrapped up what they're doing there at the airport? Is that what you're hearing?
This is a difficult situation. We want to be very careful. There was a press conference here, just ended about a half an hour ago, when Special Agent in Charge Charles Prouty of Boston absolutely refused to be drawn on any questions about the ongoing investigation. There are many strands to this story, including newspaper reports that several Arabs have been ID'd who may have been involved in the hijacking itself, including 2 carrying Middle Eastern passports, 1 known to be a trained pilot. That report out there from reliable law enforcement sources as well. But the FBI and state and local police officials absolutely refusing, really quite stone-faced, to be drawn on any of these questions at the press conference just ended 20 minutes ago or so. So yes, there is a report out there just in the last few minutes from a usually reliable local television station here, but all of that denied earlier, the FBI saying they had nothing to tell us, that this was an ongoing investigation, and as I say, half an hour ago, they gave us no indication that anything was about to break here, Leon.
That actually is about what you would expect the FBI to say and to do. All right, thank you very much, Bill Delaney. That could turn out to be some very significant news that may be breaking very soon for us. We'll get back to you later. Let's go now to Dallas, where Ed Lavandera is standing by there. Ed, over to you.
Leon, the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport is the 2nd largest airport in the country. 2,300 flights a day originate from here. So usually this is a place buzzing with passengers and buzzing with crews moving in and around and the humming of airplanes flying overhead. But this place has been left completely deserted today outside of the intense security scene that we have seen here today. This is an American Airlines terminal. It has been completely shut down as crews here are doing security sweeps of the buildings. 152 airplanes are sitting on the tarmac here at DFW International Airport, waiting for the queue to be able to take off again. We have spoken with several airport officials and airline officials throughout the morning, saying that a lot of their crews have completely rested, so that when they do get the go-ahead to move ahead, the crews will be able to move ahead, but that there are a lot of airplanes out of place, so that when the government does give the official go-ahead to move forward with taking off again, that it could take a little bit of time to get a lot of these planes back into position. But they said that this is, in a lot of ways, is just like a severe storm, and that the airplanes and all the airlines will be able to get moving ahead quickly. Leon, back to you.
Ed Lavandera in Dallas, thank you very much. Now, let's go over to Kathleen Koch, who is standing by at Dulles National Airport. Kathleen.
Leon, as you can see behind me, this huge, normally bustling international airport is a barricaded ghost town. You see no one except media, except police officers moving around at this airport. When you look out on the tarmac where normally at this time of day there would be dozens of flights landing, planes lined up waiting to take off, there is nothing. There is not a ground crew. There is no human movement. The parking lot to my right is filled with cars, but no people, no one dragging their suitcases out, no one rushing to catch a flight. It is truly a very eerie sight. Now, of course, this is the airport where the doomed flight number 77, American Airlines Flight 77, departed from and then cut that huge gash into the Pentagon. Very near here is the Dulles Marriott, where we have had some families meeting there. They began arriving some yesterday morning, a few more this morning, and they have been meeting with grief counselors, with chaplains. American Airlines has also established a set of people who have come in, some 75 of them, airline employees who have come in, and they're actually dispersing out to go to the homes of some of the families of these passengers who were killed in this deadly collision at the Pentagon, to help them cope, to support, to do whatever they can. Now, as the preceding reporters have all mentioned, that when these airports do open up, that security will be very tight. I know that Kelly at the White House referred to the possibility of actually having marshals on the aircraft. That will be a very difficult undertaking when you consider that in the United States, generally on an average day, we have 35 to 40,000 flights landing and taking off, 4,000 to 5,000 in the air at any time. So that will be hugely difficult. Another thing that will make the opening of the airports perhaps experience some delay is not the issue of the aircraft being out of position, but the fact that these airports are now going to have to meet these new, more stringent security measures before they can safely open up. Leon?
All right. Thank you very much. Kathleen Koch reporting to us live from Dulles National Airport. Now, let's go up to Paula in New York. Paula?
All right, and Leon, I'm going to take you directly back to Daytona Beach. We're looking at some interesting pictures from the Daytona International Airport, where we are told a bomb squad is thoroughly searching the cargo hold of a Continental jet. We don't know a whole lot about it, but it is our understanding that the luggage in this plane, for whatever reason, did not make its connection. We do not understand at this moment how this might be connected to the other stories coming out of South Florida. We know, according to Mike Boettcher, at least 10 FBI agents were searching 2 houses in Vero Beach, Florida, and what appeared to be a part of the investigation of the deadly terrorist attacks against the United States. We know that the FBI in Miami issued a national bulletin for law enforcement agencies to be on the lookout for 2 cars. The bulletin did not mention whether the vehicles were linked to Tuesday's attacks. This also comes on the heels of a report that a South Florida couple is indicating that they may very well have trained several of these hijackers, some men that might have trained with them a year ago. So once again, we don't know exactly what the connection of this bomb squad search at the Daytona International Airport has to these other Florida stories. But to me, Darren, one of the most interesting things is what Mike Boettcher was reporting about that car that the FBI agents have actually seized from a Boston parking garage outside of the Logan Airport there. He is reporting that some interesting materials have been seized from there. Bill Delaney going even further, his sources telling him that some Arab training manuals on flying a big plane were found in that car. So all of this will become clearer in the hours to come, as Bill Delaney reported early on. Lots of small bits of information that are very difficult to thread together and dangerous to thread together at this point.
Yeah, Paula, and another thing from our David Ensor, as he pointed out earlier this morning when we were talking to him, this very difficult balance for government officials. They don't want information from their investigations to leak out, and yet they realize the American people are very hungry for information. Perhaps we can get some insight now on how these investigations work with Stanley Bedlington. He is a former CIA senior analyst, and he is joining us. It looks, sir, like you are in our Washington bureau, or is it New York?
No, I'm in Washington.
In Washington. Thanks for joining us, sir. Give us an idea and some clues as to how investigators are trying to put together some information. I was thinking particularly looking at the plane manifest. Who got on board these 4 airplanes?
Well, first of all, I think you approach that sort of investigation at 2 levels. First, from the level of law enforcement, and secondly, from the level of intelligence, both of which working closely in tandem. You look at the passenger manifest, you do checks with your records, your data banks, either in the CIA or in the FBI, and then you go out and investigate the people. You find their houses, their addresses, and just follow up on that. That, I think, is very, very important.
So you look at everybody who was on board each of those 4 airplanes?
Oh, absolutely. All must be very closely scrutinized.
Who they were, how they bought their ticket, how did they get to the airport. These are all things that could point toward the direction as to who was involved in this operation.
Of course, and you would investigate the taxi drivers who took them to the airport and every single detail about their getting on the plane. That is very important.
This, of course, today has so many people scratching their heads, and yesterday as well. America living in fear of a lot of things in recent years, but things like nuclear war, things like biological warfare. How many people actually stop to think that an airplane could be a deadly weapon?
Very few, including myself. I note that Louis Freeh, the director of the FBI, just before he retired, made a point saying that the most likely forms of terrorism in the United States in the near future would be first cyber warfare and secondly biological, chemical and radiological warfare. This is conventional terrorism, admittedly in a very, very deadly form.
And as people try to put their lives together, the question becomes, how do we avoid future attacks?
The point is that it's going to be extraordinarily difficult. I think we need a complete reordering of the Homeland Defense system on both a law enforcement and an intelligence level. Most of all, and most important, we need something that's been recommended over the years and has never been implemented. That is the setting up of some sort of body that coordinates throughout the country the activities of various departments of government and of state and local authorities.
So you're suggesting
you're
suggesting that one of the basic problems is just communication between the agencies and the people that are already trying to work on this problem.
Well, it's not the major problem, but it is a problem, and I think we would be able to attack the problem far more effectively if we had such a committee with a very important person at the head of it who reports directly to the president.
Stanley Bedlington, former CIA senior analyst. Thanks for your insights today, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Leon.
We ought to take another personal and, I guess, up-close look, if you will, of this tragedy from which so many are trying to recover. Our producer, Rose Arce, made her way down yesterday to Ground Zero at the World Trade Center, and she took a camera with her, and she kept this notebook and wants to show you now exactly what she saw.
We took a walk toward Ground Zero. There's hundreds of fire trucks coming this way. The sky was filled with fine pieces of glass and acrid smoke. Cars were covered with dust. The street had a thick coat of debris. There was like 4 inches of dust back there right by that building, and down on the ground there was people's resumes lying, office supplies. There was, pictures from people's desks that had been just singed, and they'd blown up. The building had blown up, and the stuff had just come down like confetti. There were doctors rushing to help people. Emergency workers were moving cautiously toward the building.
You hear that? Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down.
This firefighter was trying to rescue people from 2 World Trade Centers. What did it feel like?
Very hot, pitch dark. Couldn't see almost anything. Almost crawling on your feet. A lot of debris everywhere going. A lot of rebar, a lot of broken glass, a lot of brick. Just not really too much smoke at the time, but a lot of debris.
And what about people?
There are people in there.
Another firefighter watched debris crush everyone on his truck but him. Well, what was it like when it collapsed? Was it?
Nightmare, total blindness, choking feeling.
You're covered in dust, rubble, smoke, everything. I dove under the truck.
Closer to the building, it was almost like nighttime. What was left of the building was a fiery hulk. The firefighters thought it might collapse. Pieces of the building kept falling.
The building is about to blow up. Moving back.
Rescue workers pushed people away from the scene.
We are walking back. There's a building about to blow up. On flame, debris coming down.
So everyone moved back, leaving debris and silence.
All right, and I'm back on the CNN platform where you have a commanding view of what the New York skyline looks today, absent what once were the two tallest buildings in the city, the World Trade Center buildings, Tower 1, Tower 2, the North and South Tower, of course, collapsing within an hour and a half of the time that the hijacked jets crashed into them. Now it seems quite remarkable to many of us who've lived here that it is indeed the Empire State Building that stands the tallest in our proud but decimated city today. I'm going to check in with Aaron Brown, who had this identical vantage point that I've had today for many, many hours. Yesterday, he finds himself closer to ground zero than most of us have been able to get to. Aaron, can you describe to me what you've seen? I know you had some difficulty getting down there. All of the streets we've described earlier today from 14th Street South have been closed. What have you seen?
Well, Paula, just getting here was an experience that there's very little traffic, as you know. The West Side Highway, which is normally teeming with cars, is essentially a staging area. You see everything on the highway from utility vehicles, Con Edison vehicles, electric generators, night lights so that when it is safe to move in, they have some light to work 24 hours a day. Truck after truck of portable toilets. They need to get facilities in for people. There are sanitation trucks with snowplows on them. They'll be brought in at some point to clear the wreckage. As you get closer to the area, of course, and you look behind you, what I guess about 5 blocks from where Building 7 once stood, it continues, they continue to pour water on the smoldering building. Building 7 was the last of the buildings to collapse. Tower number 1 essentially collapsed on it. This is, granted, an oversimplification, but the weight of that crushed the building. The members of Congress, let me break quickly here, have just met with the president, and they are speaking now.
People who are out there trying to save lives, and the workers, the rescue workers, and all those folks that are around the clock doing their very, very best. And of course, our sympathies with the families and all those who have been the victims of this terrible, terrible act. But now is the time for government to move forward. We're in complete agreement that we will work together, that we want to share information, that we will be ready to move on whatever the president suggests, and we will go through the debate and the actions of Congress in a bipartisan way to make that happen. But as we said last night, when somebody takes this country for granted, when it violates the people of this nation and the sovereignty and the freedom of this nation, this Congress stands united shoulder to shoulder to do the right thing, to stand up for America and do the legislative work and process that we need to do. And we confirm that with the president today.
On a bipartisan basis, I think it is accurate to say that we literally and figuratively stand shoulder to shoulder in our appreciation of the job ahead. It is to help the victims, to care for the families, and to punish those responsible. With a single-mindedness of that appreciation, we begin our work this afternoon. On a united, bipartisan, bicameral basis, we will be passing a strongly worded resolution this afternoon. We will work with the administration to allocate the resources and to dedicate whatever strategy may be required to fulfill our obligations. It is our strong desire to do this not as Republicans or Democrats, but as Americans. And we will continue to demonstrate that desire as we consider whatever other actions may be required in days ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What did the president ask of you?
The congressional leadership, having met with the president, coming out to talk briefly with the press. First, the Speaker of the House, Denny Hassert, followed by the Majority Leader of the United States Senate, Democrat Tom Daschle. Kate Snow joins us now from Washington. Kate, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Aaron. We heard echoed there much of what we've been hearing ever since yesterday when congressional leaders started to come out and talk with us and say, look, we are united. We stand behind our president. We're going to give him the support that he needs. House members have been filing in while they've been talking. They've been filing in behind me here into the chamber. They are about to get a briefing as we speak from the FBI director, Mr. Mueller, and also from Attorney General John Ashcroft. The FEMA director, Joe Albaugh, had also talked about coming to brief Congress. We imagine he may be here as well. They're having these briefings behind closed doors, all of the members of the House inside the House chamber being briefed. That FEMA briefing will be especially important, Aaron, because one of the big questions looming here on Capitol Hill, although people would rather not have to even discuss this, but a big question will be how to pay for everything that you see going on in New York, at the Pentagon, in Pennsylvania. Who's going to pay for all of this? I talked to the Budget Committee chairman of the House, Jim Nussle, just a few moments ago, and he tells me that it's not likely they're going to give the president a blank check, if you will, but on the other hand, there is unanimous support, I should say, bipartisan support to help the president with what he needs and to give the money that's needed to help with immediate needs, with recovery, with rescue, with even rebuilding perhaps parts of the Pentagon. The Democrats, some of them are cautioning that they're going to be a little bit cautious about giving over too much and destroying the budget of the government. You know, there was a lot of discussion about the U.S. government's budget before all of this happened.
Kate, let me interrupt you here. I'm sorry. As Congress works on that, investigators continue to work on who's responsible. We want to join our coverage or the coverage of our affiliate in Boston, WHDH, for more on the investigation.
Weston Copley at this point. Relatively calm inside the hotel, except, of course, on the 16th floor where all of this flurry of activity is suddenly taking place. I was there briefly and saw that there were EMS standing by on that floor with stretchers, also police officers making sure that none of the guests or anybody else in the hotel was going to be getting off on the 16th floor, and also federal agents standing by there. They were obviously very intent in their efforts that were taking place there, whatever the operation was. However, they had not shut down the elevator to the floor as of 15 or 20 minutes ago. So it seemed to be that there was still some confusion among the guests, to some extent, some confusion among the emergency personnel who were responding here. Much of what is happening in the hotel, though, seems to be business as usual, certainly outside of the extraordinary events now focused on the 16th floor.
And are you in the lobby right now?
Well, I don't want to tell you exactly where I am, Jonathan, but I'm upstairs in the hotel.
Okay. Are you able to get to any authority or anybody in charge you might be able to interview on the telephone?
We're going to try to do that right now, actually. We've been trying to reach those people, and I have talked to a few of the people. They're slowly beginning to understand what's happening, watching television sets where they can sneak into a room and see something that's going on. Very concerned for their safety, although nobody has officially told them that there's any threat to any of us who are inside the hotel at all. However, as the maids and some of the other staff here get word of this, they're just taking it upon themselves, I think, to leave and make sure that they're watching all of this from a better vantage point.
We'll continue with Julie outside. Christina, why don't you take a walk around and see if you can get anybody to speak with you?
It's very curious as to what really might be going on, because if you think if this was a bomb threat that the hotel would immediately evacuate everybody, but Christina is saying it appears there are still guests there and the maids are still walking around and they don't really know anything about what's going on.
It's a tale of two scenes. From Christina inside, it seems to be business as usual, but outside, Julie Auclair, this picture is anything but a normal day.
Anything but normal, Jonathan, and as you may be able to see, there are more and more people gathering. They are across the street all throughout Copley Square, everyone wanting to know what's going on in the Westin Hotel. At this point, as we mentioned, still dozens of police officers. They have the street blocked off just in front of the Westin Hotel. Tactical response team still inside. The entry and apprehension team, as I mentioned, going in with full gear, with their shields up, with their guns drawn, up to the 16th floor where Christina McKenna saw them. They brought in the fiber optic equipment. They want to look under the doors. They want to see exactly what they're getting into before going into these rooms. We did get word a few minutes ago that possibly some suspects were in custody. That is not confirmed, but that they had gone back in to look and see if anyone else was in the rooms. I can't tell you how many people are out here. People are standing on top of cars just trying to get a better look. But as Christina said, it seems to be business as usual. I'm not sure what floor she's on at this point, but I can see into the lobby, still people milling about, employees still inside, trying to do their best to keep people calm, let everyone know that everything is okay for the time being. No evacuation at this point. But again, 2 ambulances waiting here outside. The armored truck that the tactical team came from, they have been going back and forth to get more equipment. The last time they came out, they did get that fiber optic equipment, and they haven't come back since. But there is a huge police presence as they wait to see exactly inside.
This story, the wires, the Associated Press crossing the flash that dozens of police officers have pulled up outside the Westin Hotel in the Back Bay. A tactical team is seen running in and out of the hotel, as we've been reporting to you for about the past 15 or 20 minutes.
Julie, we see from the